On June 5, 1974, a team of 4 thieves broke into the Summa Corporation offices in Los Angeles. Summa was a company owned by eccentric business magnate Howard Hughes. The burglars gained entry to the billionaire's Romaine Street headquarters with an ease that astonished the LA police. Investigators expressed the belief that it was an inside job. A follow-up police report declared, "It is the investigating officer's opinion that someone within the corporation set up or supplied the information for this burglary." According to the report, the Hughes organization only had a single guard, Mike Davis, on duty at the time. The report goes on to say that the building's alarm system was not working and had been out of order for some time. The 4-man team forced their way into the building, bound and gagged Davis, and put him in the building's basement. Then, wheeling in a heavy 2-tank acetylene torch on a steel dolly, went directly to the office of Kay Glenn, a key aide to Howard Hughes. Using the acetylene torch, the men burned their way into the safes and filing cabinets that contained some of the company's most sensitive documents. They netted more than $250,000 in cash, a rare butterfly collection, several expensive wristwatches, and perhaps most valuable of all, 2 footlockers full of documents. For 2 decades, Howard Hughes and his companies, the Hughes Tool Company, Hughes Aircraft, and later the Summa Corporation, had been major government contractors. In the immediate aftermath of the burglary, a Hughes official called the CIA and informed the Director of Central Intelligence, William Colby, that the burglars could have access to some very sensitive information. Colby is reported to have relayed this information to the head of the FBI, with instructions to contact the thieves and facilitate the return of the documents. In particular, a memo relating to the construction of a massive ship, a lost Russian submarine, and one of the most expensive black ops in modern history. Ten days after the burglary, a man named Chester Brooks began calling Hughes headquarters and demanded to talk to Kay Glenn, Howard Hughes' secretary Nadine Henley, or Chester Davis, a lawyer and trusted aide of Hughes. Brooks claimed he had urgent business to discuss. In a series of calls to Summa HQ, Brooks proved that he did indeed have the stolen property, and he demanded that the Hughes officials pay him $1 million for the return of the files. In his last call to the Summa offices, it was reported he spoke to Nadine Henley, but when she began to take too long to answer what he felt were simple questions, he hung up. Brooks believed the phone was being tapped, and he never called back. He was right, the calls were being recorded. 2 months later, in August 1974, actor and prolific screenwriter and novelist Leo Gordon was contacted by a man called Donald Woolbright. Woolbright claimed, "I have some stuff that is dynamite, and I want to talk to a writer about what to do with it." Gordon said he invited Woolbright to his house in the San Fernando Valley, where Woolbright described the stolen Hughes files. Woolbright was interested in selling the documents to a West German publication, Der Spiegel. Gordon became uneasy and went to the LA police to report what had happened. The LAPD in turn contacted the FBI. They suggested Gordon meet with Woolbright again, and this time record the meeting. When the recording of Woolbright was compared to the recordings of Brooks from the Summa offices, the voices matched. Donald Woolbright was Chester Brooks. In a complete breakdown of intelligence tradecraft, the FBI told the LAPD that Woolbright might have a secret CIA memo. The LAPD then told Leo Gordon, who in turn told Woolbright. Donald Woolbright was spooked and went on the run. In March 1975, he would eventually turn himself into police and become the only person indicted in the burglary at the Summa Corporation offices. In Arlo Cederberg's memoir about his time as the spokesperson of the Hughes organization, he claims that Woolbright never even had the incriminating memo. It was apparently found by Summa security guard Mike Davis. He freed himself from his restraints and found the documents, along with several others on the ground, carelessly discarded by the thieves as they made their getaway. Davis, still shaken by the burglary, stuffed the documents in his pockets and forgot all about them until he got home. When the story about the secret CIA memo broke, Davis panicked and destroyed the documents. so it's unclear exactly where the leak came from. It's suspected that it was the local police, who would have had a good working relationship with members of the press. New York Times journalist Seymour Hersh had been working on the story for some time, but was convinced to delay going to print for the sake of national security. But in early 1975, the existence of the CIA memo was leaked, and media outlets began asking questions about a mysterious ship, the Hughes Glomar Explorer, and a covert operation called Project Azorian. The government chose to neither confirm nor deny the project's existence in what became known as the Glomar response. Undeterred, Seymour Hersh and others broke the story in March 1975. Project Azorian was born 7 years earlier, when on February 24, 1968, Soviet submarine K-129 left Russia's remote Kamchatka Peninsula. Its mission was to spy on US naval operations in the northern Pacific, carrying 3 nuclear ballistic missiles tipped with 4 megaton warheads and a full complement of 98 officers and crew. In early March, the submarine was shaken by an explosion that ripped a 3-meter hole in the midship. The cause of the explosion is unknown, but it was violent and sudden, and the submarine sank to the bottom of the ocean without sending a distress call. When K-129 missed several planned radio check-ins, the Soviets undertook a massive 2-month search, but never found the wreckage. However, the US noticed the increased Soviet naval activity and guessed what had happened. The US Navy began its own search for the sunken vessel. The Navy had a massive advantage over its Soviet counterpart, the Sound Surveillance System, or SOSUS, a sprawling network of underwater hydrophones installed in secret during the 1950s to passively listen to submarine traffic. The Navy identified the likely explosion that sunk K-129, then triangulated its approximate position and dispatched the USS Halibut to locate the wreck. The Halibut had been retrofitted for covert operations. The floor of the internal hangar was fitted with a doored well that penetrated the hull. Winches, spools of cable, and high-tech cameras to be lowered through this new well were also added. The Halibut painstakingly combed the ocean floor, taking thousands of photographs, and finally, in August 1968, the effort paid off. One of the images showed part of a submarine's turret. A mosaic of several photos was then assembled to achieve an overall view. It was K-129, lying on the ocean floor 3 miles or 5 kilometers down. The submarine, if recovered, would be a treasure trove for the intelligence community. Not only could US officials examine the design of Soviet nuclear warheads, they could obtain cryptographic equipment that would allow them to decipher Soviet naval codes. One morning in November 1969, 3 CIA officials arrived at the offices of Global Marine, a deep ocean drilling company known for innovative shipbuilding. Curtis Crook was in charge of all engineering for Global Marine, and the CIA presented him with a unique engineering challenge: to lift something weighing several thousand tons from the bottom of the ocean at a truly epic depth, without drawing suspicion from any observers, specifically the Soviets. Crook and Global Marine's naval architect John Graham settled on a plan that would involve 3 vessels: the Global Marine or Glomar Explorer, an enormous recovery ship with an internal chamber fitted with a bottom that could open and close, the capture vehicle built by Lockheed and nicknamed Clementine, a huge mechanical claw designed to align with the hull of the submarine, and the HMB-1, a submersible barge built by the National Steam and Shipbuilding Company in San Diego. The plan was this: the Glomar Explorer would tow the HMB-1 barge to the target site. The barge, with the claw concealed inside, would then slip beneath the ocean under the Glomar Explorer, open its roof, and deliver the capture vehicle to the ship's internal chamber, all while remaining hidden from any potential observers. The Explorer would deploy a long string of steel pipe hung from a towering gimbal derrick through a hole in the bottom of the ship. At the end of the string would be the huge claw to grab the sub and pull it into the belly of the ship. The CIA had a plan, but it was big, elaborate, and labor-intensive. It couldn't be done in secret. They needed a cover story. Enter Howard Hughes. Always something of a loner, Hughes went into complete seclusion in 1950. but he was known for being eccentric, secretive, and brilliant. He was the perfect cover for the construction of what would become known as the Hughes Glomar Explorer. The CIA concocted a cover story that the HGE was being built for Hughes's private commercial venture to mine manganese nodules located on the ocean floor. A May 1974 memo to Secretary of State Henry Kissinger explained, "The determination reached was that deep ocean mining would be particularly suitable. The industry was in its infancy, potentially quite profitable, with no one apparently committed to a hardware development phase and thereby possessing a yardstick by which credibility could be measured. Mr. Howard Hughes is recognized as a pioneering entrepreneur with a wide variety of business interests. He has the necessary financial resources, he habitually operates in secrecy, and his personal eccentricities are such that news media reporting and speculation about his activities frequently range from the truth to utter fiction." The construction of the Explorer, the barge, and the capture vehicle would take 6 long years. But in the summer of 1974, the Glomar Explorer left the west coast of the US, heading for the target site. At nearly the exact same time as the Summa Corporation offices in Los Angeles were being burgled. On June 3, 1974, a memo from the National Security Council to Kissinger announced, "Culminating 6 years of effort, the Azorian project is ready to attempt to recover a Soviet ballistic missile submarine from 16,500 feet of water in the Pacific." The Glomar Explorer arrived at the site on July 4th and began preparing for the operation. They were joined by the Soviet tracking ship Summa on July 18th. Over the course of a tense 12 hours, the Soviets photographed the Explorer, its crew, and equipment. But to the CIA's relief, Summa left the recovery area with a final radio message saying, "We wish you all the best." The crew of the Glomar Explorer got back to work, feeding length after length of pipe through the hole in the bottom of the ship. By the time the claw reached the Soviet submarine, the pipe alone weighed more than 180 tons. The claw then seized sections of the stricken submarine in its steel jaws. Slowly, the winches aboard the Explorer began to lift the submarine from its grave, tugging hard to unstick the hull from the seabed. It was a nerve-wracking process. At some point in the lift, the cables rattled. Some of the arms of the claw had broken. According to the CIA's account, the rear 2/3 of the sub, including the coning tower, the coveted missiles, and all the cryptographic equipment, slipped back to the seabed. The forward third, which remained firmly gripped in the claw, was deposited in the ship. Even if only partially successful, as the CIA claims, the mission was a major technological achievement. Nothing so large had ever been raised from so great a depth. Much of the detail of Project Azorian comes from the CIA itself. In February 2010, the agency released a heavily redacted copy of its report on the project, but some elements remain classified, so it's difficult to know exactly what was recovered, and some sources speculate that the operation was completely successful. But we do know that the Glomar Explorer retrieved the bodies of several of K-29's crew members, whom they gave a military burial at sea, which the CIA filmed and gave to Russia almost 20 years later. Coincidentally, the retrieval also brought up some manganese samples from the bottom of the ocean, the material that the Glomar Explorer was supposed to be mining for. The US government debated whether to repair the claw and make another attempt under a new code name, Project Matador. But things were changing in Washington, thanks to another burglary, this one at the Watergate building. As a result of the Watergate scandal, President Richard Nixon would resign on August 9, 1974, and there were growing doubts, given the atmosphere in Washington, whether the CIA could sustain the operation for another year without the story leaking to the press. They couldn't. Seymour Hersh's article was released in March 1975. On June 16, 1975, Kissinger sent a memo to newly appointed President Gerald Ford. It is now clear that the Soviets have no intention of allowing us to conduct a second mission without interference. A Soviet ocean-going tug has been on station at the target site since 28 March, and there is every indication that the Soviets intend to maintain a watch there. Our recovery system is vulnerable to damage and incapacitation by the most innocent and frequent occurrences at sea. Another boat coming too close, or inadvertently bumping our ship. The threat of a more aggressive and hostile reaction would also be present, including a direct confrontation with Soviet naval vessels. And with that, Project Azorian was terminated. The total cost of the operation, $800 million, which in current dollars translates to more than $3 billion. The Hughes Glomar Explorer would eventually be refitted to match its cover story and perform deep-sea drilling. It was sold to a private company, Transocean, in 2010 for $15 million, and in April 2015, the ship was scrapped. Azorian stands out as one of the most bold, ambitious, yet almost ridiculous covert operations ever, that despite its scale, stayed secret for 7 years.